influence in my prime time, I was strictly just boxing. Because trying to fight his fight, he's too crappy for it.
The crowd thought the wars ended when the bell rang, but for Thomas Hearns, the fight never stopped. At 71, he reveals the enemies who stayed with him long after the ring. The grudges that grew into shadows and the hate that refuses to die. Those rivalries weren't born overnight. They came from an era when Hearns was carving out a place in history, surrounded by giants who defined the sport. So how did he stand out in such a brutal time? The legend and his era. Thomas Hearns was never the kind of fighter you could ignore. The moment he climbed through the ropes, there was an energy that pulled eyes toward him. Tall, lean, and armed with a right hand that could stop anyone in their tracks. He didn't look like the kind of kid who grew up on the streets of Detroit. Under the guidance of Emmanuel Stewart at the Kronk Gym, that kid became something else entirely. They called him the Hitman, and once you saw him fight, you understood why. What followed was a career that made boxing history feel alive. Hearns didn't only earn victories like most champions, he broke barriers that few dared to cross, winning 6 major world titles across 5 divisions and even reaching cruiserweight. He became one of the rare fighters who could dominate no matter where the scale was set. Every step up in weight seemed impossible until he made it happen. He didn't chase safety, he looked more into challenges. And those challenges left their mark both on him and the sport itself. His willingness to move where others wouldn't said more than any headline could. Still, titles were only part of the story. The real backdrop to Hearns' journey was the era he lived in. Boxing in the late 70s through the early 90s wasn't a sport of convenience. It was raw competition, filled with champions who weren't afraid to test themselves against each other. The fights weren't scripted or softened by politics. They were battles of pride, reputation, and survival. Every arena was electric. Every broadcast was an event, and Hearns stood right in the middle of it, facing men who, like him, wanted their names etched in history. That stage didn't allow weakness, and it didn't forgive mistakes. Rivalries grew sharper because of it, sometimes crossing the line from professional to personal. What made Hearns stand out was the way he carried himself in this storm of talent. His calm stare, long reach, and knockout power gave him a presence that told you something dangerous was about to happen. His first 17 wins all ended before the final bell, and when he took the WBA welterweight crown by blasting Pepino Cuevas out in 2 rounds, it was clear that a new force had arrived. He wasn't simply a fighter to watch, he was also the fighter people couldn't stop talking about. And once you made the world stop and look, the rivalries that followed became more than simple contests. They became defining moments. For Hearns, every rivalry carried a weight beyond the ring. These weren't just names on a record. They were men who tested his will, men who left scars on his legacy, and in some cases, on his emotions too. When the punches ended and the lights dimmed, the feelings didn't always fade. Some of those rivalries lived on in his memory, long after the belts changed hands. And those lingering memories are where the line between respect and resentment often blurred. Now, this is where the story begins to tighten. Thomas Hearns wasn't only the legend who stacked titles and highlight reel knockouts. He was also the man who carried with him names of boxers that cut deeper than others. Names that, even decades later, stirred something stronger than sportsmanship. And at 71, when he finally opened up about the boxers he hated the most, the echoes of that golden age of boxing came roaring back. Every fighter has rivals, but not every rival lingers in memory for decades. For Hearns, some did. The mystery now is, who were they? The first name Thomas Hearns mentioned was Marvin Hagler, and that choice alone says a lot. Marvin Hagler wasn't the kind of champion who needed hype or headlines to make his presence felt. He earned the nickname Marvelous by grinding through the middleweight division with an unshakable will and a style that never gave opponents an inch. Now, when Hearns and Hagler finally met on April 15, 1985, at Caesars Palace in Las Vegas, it wasn't billed as just another fight. Promoters called it The War, and history would prove that label right. What followed didn't feel like boxing, it felt like survival. From the opening bell, the fight turned into chaos. Hearns stormed forward and landed a right hand so sharp that it made Hagler stumble for a moment. The crowd thought they might be about to witness a shocking finish, but Hagler didn't retreat. He kept walking straight through Hearns's punches, answering with his own heavy shots. For nearly 3 minutes, the two men swung with everything they had, trading blows as if each punch might be the last. Many still call that first round the greatest in boxing history, and yet, Hearns admitted later that it drained him completely. It was only the beginning, though, and that truth would hit him harder than any punch. When the second round began, the toll was already showing. Hearns' legs looked shaky, and the jab he relied on to control fights started to fade. What was even worse is the right hand he depended on had broken during that furious first round, turning his biggest weapon into a dull blade. Across the ring, Hagler was bleeding from a cut on his forehead, but he pressed forward with unshaken resolve. Hearns tried to keep moving, circling, and surviving. It was working at least for a moment. Then Hagler found his rhythm, and the balance of the fight started to tilt. Everyone watching could feel the shift coming, though no one could guess how sudden it would be. By the third round, the fight had turned into a test of will. Hagler's cut was so bad that the referee stopped the action to have a doctor take a look. Most fighters would have used that moment to catch their breath. Hagler used it to promise he wasn't done. He said there was no way he was going to lose the fight on a cut. And the fight went on. Seconds later, he landed a crushing right hand that sent Hearns stumbling back into the ropes. Another barrage followed, and Hearns collapsed to the canvas. He managed to get up, only to fall again into the referee's arms. In just over 8 minutes, it was finished. Hagler had won, and Hearns was left with more than a loss. For Hagler, the victory sealed his place as one of the all-time greats. For Hearns, the memory never faded. He had emptied everything into those early rounds, yet Hagler had outlasted him. Years later, Hearns admitted that the fight still haunted him. "I always made sure I stayed in shape. I did my running and everything, but after the second round, I was exhausted. I remember thinking to myself, there's no way these guys can keep up this pace. I was spent myself. It was just 3 rounds of toe-to-toe action," he recalled. Even with the intensity of their rivalry, there was a strange kind of respect between them. Hagler praised Hearns afterward, calling him a warrior. Hearns never denied it either. He spoke of Hagler with admiration, though always with the sting of unfinished business. There was no real disdain at all. "We talked quite a bit in the run-up to the fight, and we had a lot of respect for each other. It was just a fight to see who the better man was. It was real simple. Someone had to lose. I just didn't want that, a loss on my record," Hearns said. The respect was real, but so was the pain of what happened that night. It wasn't disdain. It was more like an ache mixed with pride that followed him into old age. For Hearns, the Hagler fight was never just another chapter. It was the moment that showed him how rivalries could live on long after the final bell. And that's why, even now, when he looks back on the men who unsettled him most, Marvin Hagler is always the first name to surface. What came from that fight wasn't hatred. It was something heavier, something that never left his story. Even after Hagler, Hearns' story wasn't finished. There were still other names circling around him, fighters who could have changed the course of his career in big and small ways. Some he faced, others remained what-ifs, but each carried a weight of its own. And this is where the next chapter begins. Who were they? When we talk about boxers who had a complicated relationship with Thomas Hearns, for someone like Sugar Ray Leonard, it's fair to say that although they weren't exactly enemies, there was always a competitive edge to their story. Sugar Ray Leonard was America's top boxing star in the late 1970s and early 1980s. He was known as the charismatic and media-friendly champion, often showcased as boxing's darling. His quick feet, snapping jab, and self-assured presence made every ring feel like his personal stage. Hearns, on the other hand, carried himself with quiet menace, his long arms and silent confidence announcing a different kind of danger. Before their first fight, Hearns felt overlooked in the public eye, even though he was undefeated and a world champion himself. His PR team, including publicity manager Jackie Callan, worked to build his image, but Hearns remained largely in Leonard's shadow, at least until their showdown. When the two finally agreed to fight on September 16, 1981, in Las Vegas, the world called it the Showdown. And at that moment, everyone knew history was waiting to be written. From the opening bell, Hearns took charge. His reach became a wall Leonard couldn't easily cross, and those stiff jabs kept the fight at a distance that suited him. The early rounds belonged to Hearns, and it looked as though Leonard might be in for a long night. But then, during the 6th and 7th rounds, Leonard landed a crushing left hook that made Hearns stagger. The crowd could feel the momentum shift immediately. For the first time that evening, Hearns looked vulnerable, and suddenly, the fight wasn't so straightforward anymore. Well, you know, the hitman wasn't the type to crumble. He gathered himself, switched his rhythm, and began to box with patience rather than pure power. The middle rounds showed a different side of him, a fighter who could adjust and outthink as much as he could overpower. By the 10th and 11th rounds, Hearns seemed to be steering the fight back into his hands. On the scorecards, he was ahead. It appeared that the younger man might pull off the win that would cement his rise. Yet in boxing, momentum is fragile, and one clean punch can rewrite everything. This moment came in the 13th. Leonard, worn down and behind on the cards, dug deep and found a second wind. He landed a powerful right hand that rocked Hearns, then followed it with a relentless barrage that drove him twice against the ropes. By the 14th, Leonard poured it on until the referee stepped in, and just like that, the fight was over. One moment, Hearns looked in control. The next, he was watching the chance of a lifetime slip away. Leonard walked away as the unified champion, but the end raised as many questions as it answered. For 10 rounds, Hearns had been the better man. The scorecards showed it. The crowd felt it. So had Leonard stolen victory in those final minutes. Or had Hearns let it get away? It wasn't hatred that Hearns carried after that night. It was the sharper pain of coming so close, of touching the edge of greatness, only to feel it pulled back at the last second. That kind of sting doesn't vanish, it lingers. Nearly 8 years later, in 1989, the two men met again in a fight dubbed The War. Both were older, both had carried different battles on their shoulders, but the tension between them hadn't faded. This time, Hearns knocked Leonard down twice, once in the 3rd and again in the 11th. Leonard had his own shining moments, rallying in the 5th and closing strong in the 12th. When the final bell rang, everyone waited for a clear winner, but something surprising happened. The judges called it a split draw, and the crowd erupted with many believing that Hearns had done enough to win. Once again, the question lingered. Had the better man really been recognized? For Thomas Hearns, Leonard remained a name that loomed large. He never called him an enemy, never spit venom when Leonard's name came up. Still, their fights etched deeper than any other. Leonard had pulled him to the edge, tested his limits, and left him with questions he would carry long after he left the ring. Theirs wasn't a rivalry of hatred. It was one of unfinished business, the kind of bond only forged in nights where careers, legacies, and dreams are all on the line. When you look back on Hearns' career, Leonard wasn't the only name that pushed him to his limits. What happens when the opponent across the ring isn't polished or celebrated, but rugged and relentless? Could a fighter like Iran Barkley push Hearns in ways his more famous rivals never did? Iran Barkley never carried the kind of fame that Sugar Ray Leonard or Roberto Duran brought into the ring. However, he had something that could be even more dangerous for an opponent like Thomas Hearns. He was very much unpredictable and unafraid of being the underdog. Known as the Blade, Barkley came up hard from the Bronx, fighting with a style that mixed grit with heavy-handed power. He wasn't the smoothest boxer, nor the fastest, but he had that ability to take punishment and still come back swinging. By 1988, Barkley had built a name for himself as a dangerous contender, though he was still seen by many as a step below the main fighters of the middleweight division. Hearns, meanwhile, was riding high. He had already etched his name into boxing history with wars against Leonard, Duran, and Hagler, and he carried the aura of a champion who had tested himself against the very best. When their paths crossed that summer in Las Vegas, it was billed as another chance for Hearns to extend his dominance, this time at middleweight. For Barkley, it was the opportunity of a lifetime. The build-up painted Hearns as the clear favorite. He was taller, and promoters hyped him as a man reclaiming control of the division, while Barkley was talked about as the hungry challenger with a puncher's chance. The WBC middleweight title was on the line, and most of the boxing world believed Hearns' skill and experience would easily keep it in his hands. What nobody could measure, however, was Barkley's resilience. From the opening bell, Hearns looked every bit the champion. His jab was firm, his combinations flowed with precision, and he kept Barkley on the end of long punches that snapped his head back. By the second round, Hearns had cut Barkley over his right eye and lower lip, and it seemed like the script was being followed to perfection. Fans watching ringside thought that it was only a matter of time before Hearns broke him down. Each time Hearns landed clean, Barkley seemed to shake it off, as if he was waiting for something he could only see. What was he holding back? Then a twist no one expected in the arena evolved. Early in the third round, Barkley let loose a right hand that landed flush on Hearns' chin. In a blink, Hearns was on the canvas. The same fighter who had controlled every moment seconds earlier, now struggling to make himself steady. The crowd fell into stunned silence. The air changed, and instantly, it wasn't Hearns' fight anymore. Could he recover in time? Well, he tried to. Hearns climbed back up, but Barkley wasn't about to let the chance slip away. He charged in with a furious combination, driving Hearns through the ropes. At 2:39 of the round, the referee waved it off. Iran Barkley had shocked the world, ending the fight in a way no one had scripted. One clean punch had flipped the story upside down, erasing 2 rounds of Hearns' dominance in a matter of seconds. That night was more than a single upset. The Ring magazine later called it the 1988 upset of the year, and the title fit it perfectly. There was no bad blood between them. No heated words before the fight. What happened was clearly an underdog, seizing the only opening he needed. For Hearns, the loss carried no public bitterness, but privately, the sting never really left. One misstep, one opening, and the great Thomas Hearns was caught. And in boxing, those moments never fade. When we look back, Hearns never spoke of Barkley with disdain. What made the rivalry memorable wasn't trash talk or animosity, but the raw drama of the ring. It was more like Hearns was supposed to win, and Barkley wasn't supposed to have a chance. But then, the reality played out differently, and that's why their meeting continues to be remembered till date. If Barkley proved that an underdog could shake the boxing world, then what about a fighter who built his career on fearlessness and grit? How would Hearns measure up against someone whose very presence in the ring carried its own weight? This is exactly where Roberto Duran comes in. They called him Manos de Piedra, the man with hands of stone, and that reputation wasn't built overnight. Roberto Duran had carved it out of Panama's streets and stamped it into every ring he ever stepped into. By the summer of 1984, the legend stood under the bright lights of Caesar's Palace, staring across at Thomas Hearns for the WBC and the Ring Super Welterweight titles. From the opening bell, Hearns set the rhythm. He kept Duran at arm's length with a jab that cut through the air like a spear. Less than 3 minutes into the fight, that control showed its teeth. A left hook split Duran's eye, and seconds later, a thunderous right jab sent him crashing to the canvas. Duran got up, but Hearns wasn't done. Almost immediately, a blistering combination sent him back down. The round ended, yet it felt like the fight had already tipped one way. Was this the night the stone hands would finally crack? Round 2 gave the answer. Hearns came out fast, relentless, like a man determined to finish what he started. At just over a minute into the round, Duran hit the floor once more, and this time, there would be no second chance. The referee waved it off. The bout that had been billed as Malice at the Palace was over before the second round could really begin. Hearns had done what no one else had ever done. He literally knocked out Roberto Duran. Hearns demonstrated more than just his physical advantages or strategies. He showed he could be incredibly effective and relentless when needed. Afterwards, nothing about that night felt like a personal feud. Duran didn't trash talk, and Hearns didn't show animosity afterward. Their collision shows that not every story in boxing has to be built on hate. Sometimes, greatness comes from two men meeting in the middle, giving everything they have, and leaving the sport forever changed. Was Hearns' list of hated opponents a reflection of his personal grudges, or was it proof that in boxing, hate is sometimes just another tool in the ring? Tell us what you think in the comment section below. Don't forget to like this video, share, and subscribe to our channel for more updates.